Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live, and just great to be with you again another Saturday. And of course, those of you listen by the podcast, increasing number of you listen. The technical word is asynchronously. You're not listening live during the broadcast, but you're listening later. It's not Saturday for you, but thanks for listening in as well. Of course, I'm Ed Stetzer. I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And I'm often kind of a motivational speaker who lives in a van down by the river. I'm actually here in Portland. Last night, I spoke at Mission Connection just to see just a substantial number of people gathered together to want to be faithful and focused on God's mission here. They just do great work. And actually, the conference is going on still today. Super excited about that. We actually got the privilege of announcing our new Portland extension site as well for the Talbot School of Theology. But I'm in Portland, and I couldn't get back in time to my home studio. So how am I in Portland? Where am I? I'm actually at the Luis Palau Association. And they're just doing such great work. I just spent the morning visiting, having breakfast with Kevin Palau, and I'm in their radio studio, so I'm super thankful for them. Good work that they're doing. And so it's good to be here. Gospel partners abound. And you know, Portland, it's interesting. Portland's in an interesting time. It's the theme of the conference it's ongoing. It's unshaken. But we did some research in partnership with Come Near for Portland. Actually, I did a whole 200-page city study of Portland that we published over at the Together PDX website. But what we found is, here's a conference called Unshaken. Portland's been shaken. And this part of what we're going to talk about today is we're in a time of cultural shaking. But if there's a place that's been shaken most, it might be, or at least near the top 5, would be Portland in the last few years. And so anyway, so it's good to be broadcast. Thank you, the Palau folks, for letting me broadcast from their studio here. Some of you know the life legacy of Luis Palau. It was often called the Latin American Billy Graham, though he actually was based in Portland. They do festivals around the world. Anyway, thanks to them. And also, let me introduce our guest, which we're going to talk about some of what I just mentioned, some of the cultural shifts and tumult and turbulence that we've been experiencing the last few years. And she has a unique perspective to help us think about it. Dr. Nicole Martin has decades of executive leadership experience in church and Christian nonprofits, and she just recently was named the president and chief executive officer of Christianity Today. She's the author of several books, including Nailing It: Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. We're going to talk about her book, but we're also going to talk about the culture in general. So first, Nicole, congratulations on your new role at Christianity Today. And second, thanks for joining us on Ed Stetzer Live.
Thank you so much, Ed. It is great to be with you this morning.
Well, super. Well, it's an interesting cultural moment that we're in. Of course, as you heard, I'm in Portland, and Portland's been shaken, but I think in general, just everyone recognizes we're walking through a very strange time culturally. So let's talk a little bit, because we hear some people saying that we're in a revival. We hear some people saying that, we're still in a season of decline. Give us, at Christianity Today, you're help us, you kind of report on or tell the stories of the church. Big picture, what in the world is going on in the church, and specifically in the U.S. today?
Man, that's a great question. Isn't that the age-old question? It's what on earth is going on? We could argue that this is one of the central questions of Scripture as well. It's funny. I remembered we were at an NAE meeting, Ed. This is like maybe 5,
NAE
6
is the
years
National
ago.
Association of Evangelicals, for those who don't know.
That's right. That's right. So we were in this National Association of Evangelicals meeting, and I remembered you talking about stats for the church at that time. It had to be after 2020, so maybe 2021, 22. And you said to everyone there, pastors and leaders and theologians, we should not really be alarmed by statistics that tell us that church attendance is growing or dying, or by reports of revival or deep decline. Because from your vantage point, you said we've pretty much remained steady for the past few decades. Our church attendance has remained relatively steady. Our ups and downs cause a little bit of steadiness. And I think the sense that we have to make of this is in part generational, but then it's also in part just our trajectory, our biblical trajectory. So I think what we're seeing is a very devout generation of baby boomers who learned how to read the Bible in school, who learned how to pray because of hardships like the Great Depression and because of massive societal moves like the Industrial Revolution, all of this, and wars causes a kind of a rising of faith. So boomers are still our most religious generation. So we're seeing that, but we're also seeing the decline of that super religious generation, which causes the complexities. And I think one of the things that I wrestle with, Ed, is you can have two truths at one time. It is
Mm.
true that young people who are committed to Christ and people who live in secular cities like Portland who turn to Christ are deeply committed. We should celebrate and be excited about that. And it's also true that our most religious generation is dying and that people by and large are kind of pulling away from institutional religion and pulling away from the name and the framework of Christianity. So, I mean, I guess the short answer is it's complex and it's true.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges the last few years is that everyone's sort of become an expert on religion research, and I actually
Mhm.
I mean I think it's great to have more people thinking about this as somebody who used to run a
Yeah.
research company on religion in America. But I also think that it is it is the reality. There's more than one thing going on at the same time, and I,
Yeah,
I think that
that's
we
right.
can sort of acknowledge that as well. Let me invite our callers in as well too. I should say, remember we're going to give away some copies of Nicole's book. It's not like call in. I'm a caller number 7, but it's for insightful questions and comments. Right now, we're talking about the state of the culture, the state of the church. Maybe you got a comment about that. Maybe you've got some observations about what's going on or questions about what you see. Our phone number is 877 548 3675. Again, that's 877 548 3675. Now, I know over at Christianity Today, you've been reporting on the Pew Research Center just sort of put a
Mhm.
report out just the end of last year.
Yeah.
And, be partly because, there were people saying there's a revival. There's people saying there's a collapse. But tell us a little bit about what CT, what you saw, what your observation is, reflecting a little bit on the Pew Research report.
Yeah. The Pew Research report was a little discouraging. And I think, it's hard to read a report that speaks so bluntly about our decline and not wonder, Lord, what shall we do? What's really happening here? We had several CT articles that talked about this tension that we felt and saw. And the tension is, of course, the reported decline in religiosity, the reported decline in people who claim to be Christians and decline in church attendance alongside a reported increase of revival, and I'm going to use that word intentionally, revival amongst younger people. And then we all have our anecdotes as well. Like, what do we do with the stories of what we hear? So I think that reporting has revealed that those who are committed to Christ are doing so with great intentionality. So when we see young people coming to Christ, they're not just doing it because that's what you're supposed to do at this age. They're making these authentic decisions, and that's real. I think about my experience at Urbana this past year. Urbana is a college student conference put on by InterVarsity, and I was so honored to be there, mostly because I was a student at Urbana. I was a seminary student in 2003, and that was my first time coming to this kind of missions oriented conference over the Christmas holiday. So I walk into Urbana, and here are 7,000 students praising God who have chosen to take part of their winter break to be in community with other people seeking God. Now, I can look at that conference and say, yeah, but look at the decline of religiosity in America. Or I can look at this conference and say, God, let these hearts, these souls, these minds be fireflies. They let them be the sparks for their generation so that when they go back to their campuses, they ignite something for their generation. So I have that story. And then I've got, my great grandmother, actually, not my great grandmother, my grandmother. She is 94. And this past week, we had to move her to hospice. It's been a very, very
Mm.
difficult time for our family. It's been a difficult decision to make. And I think about the symbolism of it. My grandmother taught me how to pray on my knees. I mean, grandma said you have to humble yourself before the Lord. And she took that literally and taught us how to pray on our knees. When we came into the hospital, we had to tell the nurses, listen, this is a woman of faith. She needs to know that you believe in God or a higher power or something. And so I grieve because this is a generation of a person like who was deeply rooted in faith. And so I want to honor that. And I grieve the loss of a generation like that. But I also honor what God is doing in Urbana, at Passion, in all of these conferences that we saw recently in campuses where young people are coming to Christ. So we're seeing that as well. And I would say the last thing that we're seeing at CT is the global ramifications of this kind of overall decline. So we have a complex picture globally. On the one hand, we celebrate the fact that America is still more religious than its socioeconomic peers. So when you look at wealthier countries, America tends to be a more religious country. And we should celebrate that because religion helps us thrive. Religion in general helps us become more moral, more empathic and compassionate toward others. But then when you look at us worldwide, you can see we are declining. We are not, the once religious country that we used to be. And that should cause us some concern. So, tale of two cities, both things are true. It's very complex.
It is indeed, and we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to talk about this. We're going to take people's calls about this as well. Again, our phone number, maybe you want to jump in and kind of give your observation about the state of faith or the state of our culture, or maybe you got questions about it. Our guest is Nicole Martin. She has a new book, Nailing It, Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. We're going to get to that as we talk through some of these cultural questions. Again, 877-548-3675. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer live. Nicole Martin from Christianity Today is here. By the way, the cool people, the insiders, the hipsters, they refer to it as CT. So if you hear her say CT, that's not Connecticut, that's Christianity Today. But Nicole Martin is the brand new CEO and president. By the way, I never really understood how you could be both president and CEO. Why aren't you just the president or the CEO? But I guess you could be. I don't know. You don't need to answer that. That's just my weirdness. I'm like, how are people?
Yeah.
Why do they need two titles? Anyway, let's
That's great.
talk to me a little bit more, and then we're going to go to calls. Let me remind people we're talking kind of about the state of faith, your observations, your questions, your comments. Our number is 877-548-3675. They tell me to say it twice and a little slower the second time, so 877-548-3675. All right, so the Pew Report kind of pointed to somewhat steadiness, but a lot of it has to do with older people being more religious, more Christian identified than younger people. Now, just earlier before that, Gallup had a report out as well that I know you folks interacted with at CT. So tell me a little bit about what you see in, and this was this was kind of a stunning headline. The headline, just for people who know, is Drop in U.S. Religiosity Among the Largest in the World. And so talk to us a little bit about that report.
Yeah, this report was interesting because the central question was around how important is religion in your daily life? And so that question drove this drop. And it's important for us to note that this is not a Christian report, so to speak. So we're talking about religion across the board. When I talk to Jewish families and rabbis, they report the decline in childbearing. They're not seeing as many Jewish children being born, same in Muslim families in the US. So, there are a lot of complexities there. But again, I think it's important that we balance this decline, this large decline that we're seeing in answering a question, how important is religion in your life, to a rising devotion of those who are committed. I remember you said you're with Kevin Palau today. Please tell him I said hello. But I remembered, have friends in Portland and in Seattle. This is while I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we would joke about the difference between quote unquote Southern Christians and quote unquote Western Christians. And the joke was, you Southern Christians don't even know why you're a Christian. You're a Christian because it helps your job. It's what people do. And, the brunch line is just much better after church. Meanwhile, people in Seattle and Portland in areas where it's not as quote unquote, it's not a cultural Christian space, that they tend to be more devout. So I think I keep harping on the complexities because data only tells us one side of the story. And if we go this one side, this narrative of deep decline, then we'll be prone to diminish the real life change that is happening in the lives of young people in particular, but also in other spaces of our lives. We see rising devotion in immigrant churches. We see rising, increasing numbers, even in mega churches. So we cannot ignore that while decline is real, devotion is also real, and we can hold both of those at the same time.
Yeah, and I think this is part of where the data is sometimes difficult to track too, because as you pointed
Yeah.
out, I'm here in Portland, and I just share this data with the folks here, and it's fascinating that among young people there's a bubbling interest in faith. But if you're
Hmm.
a 22-year-old Christian, an evangelical Christian in Portland, you're like all in. Now, if you're a
Yeah, that's right.
22-year-old kind of evangelical Christian in Texas, you don't have to be all in. It's sort of
Hmm.
it's again,
Hmm.
we're we got people listening in Texas, we got people listening in Portland. It's great, but
Yeah.
there's a different cultural
Yes.
presence of religion, and so again, it's also hard to say, this is American faith. I mean, there's
Hmm.
Portland, the Northeast looks different. It
Yep.
is sort of fascinating. Okay, well, we actually got some calls coming in. Let me remind everybody of our phone number: 877-548-3675. And we're going to go to Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, can I just say that when I was a young dad living in Forsyth County, Georgia, that we would go up to Blue Ridge, Georgia, and you had all these festivals, and I love Blue Ridge, Georgia. Thanks. What a great
It's
place to live
beautiful.
as well. But thanks, it's so great there. But go ahead with your question or your comment, Elizabeth.
It is really beautiful, as you said, and kind of like right next to Blue Ridge. But the
Mm.
question is, I do have two adult children, 27 and 30 years old, and they were raised on the faith. And but today they are like distant, like
Mm.
somehow just not engaged with it. And I'm seeing this movement about young people coming to Christ and just desiring and seeking truth. And my question is just how can I encourage them in a way that it's not forcing or but in a way that it will be inviting them again to see this youth as I would name revival that we are seeing and talking about.
No, I think Elizabeth has a super question, and again, if you want to hold on after you hear Nicole's answer, and if you like a copy of her new book, we'll get one of those to you. But I think Elizabeth's question kind of, I mean, there is a data that shows an increasing interest among young adults. It is also not true. We've seen it on one of the major cable news networks. Keeps putting up this graphic that says, younger adults now attend church higher than any other group, and that's
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
a misunderstanding of Barna
Yeah.
research data. That Barna research has emailed this agency over and over again, and they're not changing it. But but because here's the reality: younger adults are going to church at a lower level. However,
Yeah.
there is a bubbling interest in spiritual things, and some young adults, and actually disproportionately young men, are coming to faith in Christ. So Elizabeth's
Yeah.
question is both personal, but feel free to
Yeah.
frame it in the context of the cultural trends as well. So she's asking, how
Hmm.
do I encourage the movement of young people to God? I have these two sons who are not pursuing
Hmm.
God. So help us with the personal and then talk about the cultural.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, just for raising that because that question also brings a real deep prayer request. I'm a mom, and I think when we raise our kids, what we want more than anything in this world is for them to know Jesus for themselves. And sometimes we recognize the journey takes a different path, probably different than we would have anticipated. And certainly when our kids grow up and they start making their own choices, we all we can do is consult and to pray and to believe the power of prayer. I remember going back to my grandmother again. She prayed every single night for her children and her children's children, the seed of my seed. And she learned that prayer from her mother, who prayed constantly for the seed of our seed. So I want to say on a personal level, don't underestimate the power of a praying mother, of what it means to pray over your children, to pray that God would meet them where they are and draw them closer to you, to Him. On the kind of macro level, I want to tap into what I believe the He Gets Us commercials are trying to get at, and the Come Near organization. I think what they're trying to tap into is this understanding that younger generations do not want church. They do not necessarily crave ritual. They don't necessarily long for liturgy, though some of them are more open to it than others. What they crave and what they want most is the authentic Jesus. And I think what we're seeing when we see younger people coming closer to Christ, they're seeing that Jesus meets them where they are, that Jesus speaks their language, that Jesus is touchable and real in very crass language. They're seeing Jesus is kind of like a really popular influencer. And they're moved by someone who can influence them for good. So I think on the macro level, the question is, how can we as believers help present an authentic version of Jesus to younger generations? Maybe this looks like inviting younger people to send us their prayer requests. Hey, if you're going through a hard time, let us pray for you. I have not run into any person of any religion or non-religion who's ever said, no, please don't pray for me. Everyone wants us to pray for them. So prayer can be part of that, both praying for the younger generations and also asking them to send us their prayer requests. And then we're also seeing an opportunity, I think, for the church to present more authentic understandings of Jesus, preaching about the person of Jesus, preaching about the historicity of Jesus on earth, fully God, fully man, and then pointing them not to a magic genie that makes everything better, but to a Christ who's with them on mountains and valleys and every part of their lives. And that's what I hope the church will take advantage of in this moment as well.
Super, super good. Let's go to Raj in Oklahoma. Raj, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I had a comment. Is it possible that we as Christians are becoming more fragile in our beliefs and maybe not using the Bible as the blueprint for life? And that, in the younger generation, everything is just so sensitive, whereas when I was growing up, pain was the gift that nobody wanted. We had to struggle. So I just kind of wondered about that.
I think it's a super question, Raj, as well. I mean, we've seen books like The Anxious Generation. So, fragile, I think that's a word that people have used to sort of describe younger generations. And let's start with the big picture of in culture and then talk about, because I think it may be different among like Gen Z Christians who seem to be more in than less in. But let's hear your observation. What do you think, Nicole?
Oh man, I love that question, Raj. I would agree. And I think that research agrees as well. I saw a study recently on global resilience, and I'll have to look at that citation. But in general, the study said in 2024 and 25, we've seen a rising decline in global resilience, in the global understanding of what it looks like to overcome adversity, to go through difficulties, to bounce back from hardship. So when you look at boomers, again, like my grandmother, she had to go through so much hardship. And yet she was able, when you ask her today, Grandma, how did you make it through hardships? How did you make it through the times when you didn't have enough food and you didn't know, how you were going to make it to school and when you didn't have the right opportunities or when the doors were closed? And she would say, nobody but Jesus. So I think Raj is tapping into something, which is the capacity that the gospel has to carry us through hardship. So, how do we raise a generation that is not used to hardship to lean on the Word of God as their anchor in hardship? That's a question we need to be exploring. And I also think part of our cultural reality is we are surrounded by cultural comforts. Are you, having trouble waking up? We've got something for that. Having trouble going to sleep? We got something for that. Are you a little anxious? We got something for that. I mean, like, we have built a commercial industry on comfort wear, literally comfort clothes and comfort drinks and comfort food. So we've placated in some way. We've numbed in some way. We've got a numbed society that suggests that maybe we don't know what pain looks like. And I'm not going to soapbox here because I feel very strongly about what Raj is talking about. I think the greatest impact where we feel this the most is in leadership. And when you become a leader for Jesus Christ in any capacity, leading a Bible study, leading as a pastor, leading in a secular organization as a Christian, when you become a leader and you think that life is only supposed to be about resurrection, and you forget the crucifixion, then you lean into a comfort lifestyle and you forget the core of the gospel where Jesus says, take up your cross. And let's remember, the cross is not a comforter. The cross is not something easy to carry. The cross is a difficult thing. But even Jesus says, take that up, and you will find that that yoke will be easy. That burden will be light. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road. How do we help younger generations to see you will go through hard times, but Jesus will meet you there and he'll carry you through? I think that's where we need to lean in.
So good, so good. And again, that's a key part when you talk about leadership. That's a key part of your book. Raj, if you'll stay in the line too, we'll give you a copy of Nailing It, Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. And again, it's a real helpful book. I've done another interview with Nicole over at the Biola University YouTube page as well. We actually were driving around in a van having a fun conversation. But again,
fun.
super helpful resource as well. Let me encourage you to jump on our calls for the next segment, and you can ask some questions or comments. 877-548-3675 is our number. That's 877-548-3675. We're talking to Dr. Nicole Martin, president of Christianity Today, and talking also about her new book, Nailing It, Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. Stay with us. We'll continue our conversation in just a minute. All right, we're back at Stetzer Live. We are having a conversation with my friend, Dr. Nicole Martin, who is also the president and CEO of Christianity Today, relatively new in that role. Her book, before she became president of and CEO of Christianity Today, is Nailing It, Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. We're going to talk in the last segment some about your leadership at Christianity Today. There's some challenging times as you lead through those, in publishing in general and Christianity in general. It's in CT. We'll talk about some of those in our last segment. Again, our phone number for those who'd like to call in is 877-548-3675. Let's see where we can go. We actually got lots of good calls coming in. Let's go to Holly in Racine, Wisconsin. Up cold up there, Holly, but you jump right in. Go ahead. Oh, I don't think Holly's there, so we'll maybe see if we can swing back there. So let's go to Tony. Tony, is it? Tony in West Chicago, Illinois. Tony, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yes. My question really is surrounding stats that are given about church attendance relating to the real sort of practice of Christianity. When we sort of factor in what we're hearing so much about church deconstruction, that is moving away from classical scriptural beliefs, and I'm wondering, what your opinion is about that difference in stats versus real Christianity.
That's a super question because, and here's the thing, this, Nicole, like I just shared some data at this conference yesterday, and, 60% plus people identify as Christian, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually as we're evangelicals. You're Christianity Today, this great legacy of Billy Graham, who would define being a Christian as making a volitional commitment to Christ, born again, receive Christ experience, whatever language you use. So one of the things I would say, it does seem to me, this is Ed's observation, and part of what you quoted me as saying earlier on, is that, the self-identified Christianity is declining, but kind of that evangelical faith and practice, though not perfect and lots of problems to address in the church, it hasn't been. So how do we kind of distinguish between broad stats about Christianity and our own tradition of evangelical and devout faith?
Yeah. I think this question is important because it does, to me, kind of ring in the questions asked of the Gospels. You think about Jesus and his time building and making disciples. He's very clear, even amongst the 12, there are differences among you. There are those who will be quick to cut off an ear, and there will be those who will be quick to betray. And then when you think about the resurrection of Jesus and you think about life of the early church, there are those who are coming, who are excited, and then there are those who are doubting. Even before the resurrection, the ascension of Jesus, you think about Jesus coming back, you think about Matthew 28, and he's giving the Great Commission. Even in that crowd, There were those who rejoiced and those who wept. So there's always been a kind of a different categorization. There are those who are Christian and non, and then amongst those who are Christian, there are those who are kind of surface level Christians. There are varying levels of Christianity. Here's what I think we need to do. We need to focus in on what does it take to truly build disciples of Jesus for our time. Even in those who are church goers, some are not as strong in their faith as they need to be. And the moment we stop asking this question, how do we make strong, faithful disciples, is the moment we give up on our role of the church. We always have work to do. We have evangelistic work in reaching people to come to Christ. And then we've got discipleship work on helping people to really understand what that means to follow Christ. I think at CT, our job is to try and help people to make sense of the world as they follow Christ. Because sometimes when you talked about this kind of breaking down of the church, this what was the phrase? It was a deconstruction of the church. Part of that happens because they don't feel that the church is able to give them adequate answers. So part of our making disciples is to help people make sense of the world, help them to see Christ at work in the highest and lowest moments of our lives. So we have a lot of work to do, but we also have a lot of rejoicing because for every 3 people who leave the church, there will always be one who's coming and saying, "What must I do to be saved?" And let's make sure that we fulfill our goals, our roles as a church and within our own giftings to ensure that people are coming to Christ, and when they come, that they're being discipled.
Let's actually go. This leads, I think, a good kind of segue into Greg's question. Greg in Ohio, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much for taking my question. I think that's a great segue into my question also.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking. All right, let's go for it.
I was in the church for 40 years, and I did not get answers about the Bible from Christian preachers, and so I was kind of in the upper parts of the politics of the church. I was a mainline denominational church. Not a holy roller, not a snake handler, nothing like that. I'm from the Midwest.
That's quite the contrast, Greg, from mainline to snake handler. But yeah, keep going.
There are those out there. Anyway, so I had questions. I'm a carpenter with a high school education. I'm not a theologian. I read voraciously. I've always read voraciously. My dad, when I was a young kid, he came into my bedroom one night, and I was under my covers with a flashlight. And, generally like 13-year-old boys, a father has a suspicion when that happens. Well, he jerks back the covers, and I'm reading my Bible.
Wow.
And I still remember he cried. My dad cried, and he never came in the room again. But so I had questions, and because I would read my Old Testament, and stuff didn't seem to match up. And so I would ask pastor, and I knew a lot of preachers, and I would ask them questions, and I never got answers. And in my line of work, I'm a contractor. I deal with a lot of salesmen, and we need salesmen. I'm not denigrating salesmen, but salesmen have a particular bent. And
totally.
I got to sense that in the preachers that I would, not that the preachers were salesmen, but that same characteristic kind of came into focus when I would ask them specific questions about what didn't line up.
Difficult questions. Yeah, difficult questions in the Bible, things of that sort, right? So you're like, and they weren't. And you don't identify as a Christian any longer today, correct?
No, I do not.
Okay.
So
yeah. Well, let's see if Nicole can kind of. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Tell you, I will. So I got taught, and the Christian Bible teaches that Jesus' blood is the only way to atone for sin, and I understand that. That would be Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22. So, but in the Hebrew Bible, blood atonement is a very minor thing. Actually, when the temple is operating, the blood atonement is only for sins that you commit by ignorance or mistake. Never willful sin, only unwillful sin. And we have numerous examples in the Hebrew Bible where sin was forgiven, was atoned, and there was no animal sacrifice offered. And so it caused me angst to teach my children that Jesus' blood is the only atonement for sin, when I have examples in the Old Testament, many examples, of people whose sin was atoned for, and there was no blood offered.
Cool. Well,
And
let's get
so-
into the conversation with Nicole, though. So we want to give her time to respond and everybody. But let me say first,
Absolutely. I talk too much. You can always tell me to shut up.
no worries, Greg. I was debating whether to take your call, and then the call before was just led right into it. So thank you for your call. I want you actually
You're
to
welcome.
I want you to hold on a second.
Yeah.
We're going to weigh in for just a second, but we're going to come back in just a second, sort of address your question and your conversation. But Greg, thank you for calling, and I would just encourage you to, one of the things, you're obviously well educated as well, because it wasn't like some random question, here. But I would also say too that theologians and biblical scholars have kind of wrestled through some of these issues. We'll talk about this more on the other side, but I want everyone to hang on. And again, our phone number one more time is 877-548-3675. We're going to continue our conversation right after this. Okay, we're back, and really, we had a super call from Greg in just a minute ago, and talked about, specifically, he left the faith, doesn't identify as a Christian because he couldn't get some questions answered, particularly about the sacrifice in the Old Testament, sacrificial system in the Old Testament, and why not every sin was atoned by that sacrifice. And again, I feel like if those of you on many of the Moody radio stations, Michael Rodelnick's just before this, and this is he just does Bible answer questions all day, which I think is awesome. For me, I would I'll have Nicole could weigh in just a second, but it's probably a longer conversation. I would actually refer to what I think is the best resource on this is The Cross of Christ by John Stott, and in there he shares a few things, and I would share with our audience here that blood represents life given under judgment. He points to Leviticus 17 and Hebrews. And then he does point to a big picture is substitution is moral, not mechanical. And I think that's important, that the Old Testament sacrifices were like teaching us. They were a divine pedagogy, teaching us, teaching Israel what forgiveness costs. So again, he's right that again, it's not like every single thing, but it's pointing to something greater and to the fulfillment in Jesus. And again, Greg, obviously this is a whole much longer conversation as well. And I just appreciate your honesty, and you're obviously thinking about these things. I would also encourage you not to, if you're still reading and thinking on some of the stuff, I'd read The Cross of Christ. I would read thoughtful Christian scholars to sort of address some of these issues. But Nicole, what would you add to my response to Greg? And then we'll continue our conversation.
Yeah, it's a great response. I think I would also add that the standards of ministerial preparation have changed. And I think it does grieve me that there were pastors who could not answer the questions, but it also doesn't surprise me. And I think when we are in a pursuit to find Christ, let us not be daunted by the mistakes or the shortcomings of humanity. Human beings are not Christ. We are not God. Will never meet the needs that only God can meet. But the fact that Greg was listening to Moody Radio, the fact that he called in, the fact that he explores so much, and that he has children that he's trying to raise in good, rational, ethical ways, I think that all points to the fact that God is working in his life. So I'm praying for you, Greg, that God would just lead you to the right resources. I love the resources that were recommended. I think, when you go to Bible Answer kind of websites, you might find a little bit of everything, but I'd say listen to the resources that Ed has mentioned, and know that God is leading you. He's directing you to the truth of Jesus Christ. And I really hope that you find that truth in Christ.
Yeah, me too. I think it's great. Thank you, Greg, for your call. Part of what, you lead Christianity Today, which is, it's a thoughtful, it's an attempt at a kind of a thoughtful engagement of culture. And,
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to have knee-jerk reactions to some things. So tell me a little bit about what is your vision for where, and when I became the dean of Talbot, everyone kept asking me what my vision was. And I always said to them, my vision is
Yeah.
to help our Talbot programs grow and thrive. But,
Yeah.
right now CT is, a lot of people are unsure where CT is going. There's been,
Yeah.
pretty significant criticism of Christianity today. You're
Mhm.
stepping into all this. So what would you say to
Mhm.
our audience about what your desires and hope for CT, what the Christianity today, what they are?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's anchored me with that question, what's your vision, is what has been the vision and the legacy of CT. Billy Graham started CT in 1956, October. So we're almost 70 years old. And he started it from a dream that he had in the early 50s, where he woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning after having conversations with his friends at that time. And his friends were people like Charles Fuller, like Charles Ockengay. Is it Harold Ockengay? There are
Harold
like
Ockenga,
five
yeah.
Harolds. That's
I know,
right.
that's
I
true.
get my
And Christianity
Charleses
today is
and
surrounded by
Harolds.
heralds. Exactly.
It really is.
Exactly.
We have like 8 heralds in
Yeah,
our history. But he's
exactly.
having this conversation with these prominent theological and ministerial figures, and they come up with the solution. The problem that they have is they don't feel like ministers, evangelical ministers at the time, had intellectual resources to go to where they could grow outside of seminary. So what's the answer? Well, Fuller says the answer is a seminary. So he goes and does that. Ockengay says it's a seminary. In fact, Ockengay and Billy Graham come together and they do, an extension of Gordon Conwell. But Billy Graham still feels by 1956 that's not enough. So he wakes up 2 o'clock in the morning. He says God gave him a vision and he writes it down. He needs a space where leaders can wrestle with the current issues of their day. He wants to create a community where leaders can exchange ideas and to think theologically about societal ills. And he says, I think it should be a magazine, and I'm going to call it Christianity Today.
Hmm.
That vision informs who we are today. We exist to help leaders, Christian leaders, not just leaders, but Christians in general, and not just Christians, people who are seeking, but primarily to help people make sense of the world. So, sometimes we get to critique, well, you always talk about the bad things. But if you read the Bible closely, friends, the Bible is not
That's true.
all good news as if there was no bad news. The Bible is good news because it is the answer to the bad news happening around us. So when
Mhm.
we have to report on challenging news, we do so in a redemptive way. When we talk about what's happening in culture this week about embryos and IVF and about the advancements of technology and the role of AI, we've got our job is to help us not tell you what to think, but to help you think about how you should put this in a biblical framework so that you can make sense of the world. Because we've been the same. 70 years. We're trying to help live out that mission by elevating the stories and ideas of the kingdom of God with deep, beautiful orthodoxy.
And I think that orthodoxy is obviously centrally important. I think Billy
Yes,
Graham in '56 said he wanted to quote restore intellectual respectability and spiritual
that's
impact
it.
to evangelical Christianity unquote, and that's so Christianity today. But they
Yeah.
also said pretty bluntly, I'm quoting from CT, theological
Hmm.
liberalism. This is back in the day,
Yes,
has failed to meet the moral and spiritual needs of people, and goes on to say
that's right.
Christianity today is confident that the answer to the theological confusion existing in the world is found in Christ and the Scriptures unquote. So, so
Hmm.
is and you just kind of put out a statement of principles. I saw that.
Hmm.
So, like you just mentioned, embryos and IVF.
Yeah.
You have to also have some views of where you are on cultural
Yes.
issues of the day. So, what's the
Hmm.
lens or the perspective from which Christianity today wants to
Hmm.
see things? I think that's
Yeah.
part of the question
Yeah.
people have.
That is the question, and that must be the question because if we don't know the answer to that question, then we become all things to all people. But going back to the quotes from Billy Graham, he says that this magazine would, quote, plant the evangelical flag in the middle of the road, taking a conservative theological position, but a definitive liberal approach to social problems. Now, he makes the statement in the 1950s. The words
Right. That
conservative
meant
and
something
liberal
different then.
have,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly,
Right. Right.
means
Right.
something totally different. We're not
Yeah.
talking, and Billy Graham in no way did anything where he would say would, be classified by today's understanding of liberal.
Right, that
But what
might that
he's
might have meant then, like, to be in favor of civil
yeah.
rights. So it's
Yes,
different thing, yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So I think this is where we're wrestling because there are some issues where the line is clear. We stand on a biblical premise of what it means to understand the story of the stranger. We stand on biblical principles when we are called to care for the poor. These are biblical principles. And then there are parts where it's not so clear. So for CT, we have to think about what are our guardrails so that we know where we can start to kind of and germinate conversation. So for example, we are nonpartisan. That gives us some room to both celebrate and criticize on both sides of the political aisles. We know, for example, that we are evangelical. So we are very clear in our biblical tent pegs. And within that, we can have different conversations on where we disagree. We may not all agree on, for example, women's ordination. We may not all agree on whether or not, we should go with AI and go all in or not. But there should be room for conversation. I think my vision is that there would be space in this huge tent that we call Christianity, where we can have civil dialogue about areas where we agree and disagree and still go to dinner after. I mean, I'm saying that facetiously, but we're living in a time where our polarization causes us to say, I don't even want to eat at the same table with that person. But what does it look like for the Southern Baptist and the Pentecostal, for the Reformed and the Calvinist to say, we are Christianity today? That's the vision. That's where we want to go. We are clear on who we are. We're clear on what we believe, but there's room for dialogue and discussion about the issues that affect us most. And that's what we're trying to solve for.
Well, I'm praying for you in your new leadership role. I'm praying for Christianity Today. We need a
Thank
Christianity Today. I'd use the word orthodox as deeply orthodox and also helping us to understand the cultural moment. Nicole Martin's been our guest. Super thankful for her joining us today. Let me also thank our team who does a great job. Karen Hendren, our producer, Merle St. James, our engineer, associate producer, Lisa Jempty. Cheyenne is on the phones today. To hear today's program again, you can always go to edstetzerlive.com. We're also on social media, all at edstetzerlive.com. And Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.